Putin's biggest problem may not be on the battlefield, but rather waiting for him inside of Russia. Veterans, hardened in Ukraine, are coming home with scars, doubts, and a growing sense that the war they survived doesn't match the story the Kremlin keeps selling. For a system built on fear, control, and careful image management, that's a threat it can't hide or silence. These men aren't just former soldiers. They are a moving fault line running straight through Putin's power. Their numbers are huge, their combat experience is real, and their mood is unpredictable. That alone is enough to make the Kremlin uneasy. But here's the part that cuts even deeper. Putin's big plan to control them is already cracking, as the gap between propaganda and real life grows wider each month. Something is shifting beneath the surface. Something the Kremlin didn't plan for and can't fully control. Once you see it, you'll understand why the men Russia praises might be the ones it fears the most. Here's the part that's keeping everybody on edge. Veterans aren't coming home quietly. As people who have gone through unimaginable horrors, they're comparing notes, sharing stories, and stripping away the official version of the war one conversation at a time. They don't need speeches or rallies to expose the cracks. All it takes is a kitchen table, a few friends, and the truth about what they saw. And once those stories start spreading, as they have, the Kremlin loses the one thing it relies on most: control over the narrative. And that brings us to the scale of what Putin is facing. We're not talking about a handful of soldiers returning home after a short conflict. This is the largest wave of battle-hardened men Russia has seen in decades, and all of them are reintegrating back into society. Right now, more than 620,000 veterans have already rotated back or been demobilized, according to leaked Defense Ministry figures. That number alone would be enough to reshape a country, but it's only the first wave. Hundreds of thousands of more are expected to follow in the next few years. And each group brings its own mood, its own trauma, and its own sense of what went wrong. All of this chaos blends right into the civilian masses. The interesting thing is that this force is not uniform. It is a mix, held together only by the fact that they survived the same war. You have contract soldiers who signed up early, conscripts who never thought they would see real combat, reservists pulled from quiet civilian jobs, and ordinary men dragged into uniforms during emergency mobilization. Many came back shaken or disillusioned. Many came back angry. And some came back changed in ways their communities cannot handle. And then there's the group that the Kremlin would rather forget: the prison recruits. More than 70,000 pardoned convicts have already been released back into society after serving in the most violent sections of the front. These are men who lived close to crime long before the war began, and the brutality they experienced in Ukraine only deepened that instinct. If they posed a risk before, they pose a far greater one now, and they are returning to regions that were already struggling with poverty, weak institutions, and low trust. Because of the diversity of these veterans, the experiences they bring back could not be more different. Some fought in the ruins of Bakhmut and Mariupol, where every hallway felt like a trap. Others spent months in trenches, living under drones, where even a small movement could mean death. A few came from special units that tried to hold on to discipline, while Wagner and Storm Z fighters were shaped by pure survival, harsh orders, crushing losses, and no real training. These battles left scars you cannot visibly see, but those scars shape who they are now. And as you can imagine, their states of mind are just as fractured. PTSD is everywhere, and Russia is really not prepared to handle it. Even the health ministry admitted in October that there is only one psychiatric bed for every 400 returning fighters. That tells you everything about the system, or the lack of one, meant to welcome these men home. All that pain has to go somewhere, and too often it's coming out on the streets. And remember, many of them come from poor regions with little money and even fewer opportunities. Think back to how Putin pulled heavily from Siberia and minority communities. Those men are now returning to towns that were struggling long before the war. Naturally, the resentment runs deepest in the ethnic communities. Buryatia, Tuva, and Dagestan sent men at 4 to 5 times the rate of Moscow or St. Petersburg and took casualties to match. Back home, the returning survivors are greeted as heroes on television and as cannon fodder in private conversations. Local leaders who cheered the recruitment drives are now dodging angry crowds. In Makhachkala and Ulan-Ude, funerals turn into protests within hours, as grief often manifests through anger. The reaction? Moscow keeps sending extra riot police to these regions, not to Ukraine. That tells you where the regime thinks the next explosion is most likely to happen. All of this just fuels the trauma, mixed with anger, disappointment, and a kind of pride that has nowhere to go. For many of these men, the idea of taking a normal job again feels almost unreal. Many don't even try. Some don't even fully realize that they are back home and not on the battlefield anymore. This is not just a wave of men. It's a wave of trauma, skills, and experiences that the state cannot absorb. And that is why the Kremlin does not see them as heroes, no matter how many medals it hands out. It sees them as a shadow it cannot control. That shadow now hangs over Putin's organized system. Which brings us to the real question. Why does he fear them so much? Well, the fear starts with politics. Veterans carry something the government can't manufacture or polish on television, the weight of having actually fought. In Russia, most officials climb the ladder by showing loyalty, repeating slogans, and avoiding mistakes. The men coming back from Ukraine carry a different kind of authority. It doesn't come from medals or speeches. It comes from the simple fact that when they say they fought for the country, everyone knows it's true. That creates a dangerous gap inside Russia. On one side are the people who risked their lives. On the other hand are the people who've only talked about sacrifice. Putin's propagandists can call themselves patriots all day, but the guy missing half a leg from Avdiivka doesn't need to raise his voice to win that argument. Street fights are loud, but the quieter danger is the one that walks into a voting booth or a governor's office with real moral authority. This isn't just about crime or unrest, it's about legitimacy. Veterans hold a kind of authority no officials can fake, and that cuts straight into Russia's political core. If they ever decide to turn frustration into a real organization, they could challenge local leaders, regional bosses, and even national ones. History shows why this matters. After the Soviet war in Afghanistan, returning fighters became political voices and paramilitary leaders as the state weakened. Today's veterans are far more numerous and far more seasoned. As of late 2025, at least 183 former frontline soldiers have already been elected into regional legislators, triple the number from the previous cycle. And some have openly criticized governors on live television without being silenced. Moscow noticed that, and read danger faster than local police can. They aren't easily intimidated, and they don't respect a system that they believe used them and then abandoned them. Many form tight-knit groups linked by shared combat experience, and those groups grow into networks outside of the state's reach. Some are harmless clubs. Others become gangs or private security outfits that follow their own rules. Local police chiefs have started calling them the new Chechen battalions. Except nobody in Moscow knows who they answer to. And the Kremlin's nightmare doesn't stop with the men. Their families, wives, mothers, and sisters have become a force of their own. Grief and anger have turned into organized defiance. Groups like Put Domoy and the Council of Mothers and Wives now count tens of thousands of members across Russia. They begin by demanding rotation home for exhausted soldiers. And this year, they were blocking roads, storming government buildings, and filing lawsuits that actually reached court. These women film everything, post it instantly, and speak with the same moral weight as the fighters themselves. When a mother who lost her son stares down a governor on camera and asks where the body is, propaganda doesn't work. Moscow has arrested dozens, but every detention only brings more women into the streets. Speaking of bodies, one of the biggest sparks is those that never come home. Tens of thousands of men are listed as missing, yet death certificates are delayed or denied, so the state can keep paying them as active and avoid paying out lump sum compensation. Families call them dead souls. Wives camp outside morgues and military offices for weeks. When a refrigerator truck with 200 unidentified bodies shows up in a region, the news spreads faster than any censor can stop it. Veterans who served with the missing know exactly what happened. That shared knowledge is turning grief into fury faster than any propaganda can cool it. The government sees these patterns and reacts with a mix of silence and panic. Former prison recruits are now watched even after their contracts end. A new law allows them to be placed under administrative supervision for up to 8 years. Police are told to monitor gatherings where veterans speak too openly. Surveillance has expanded in regions where returnees cluster. And none of this solves the real issue. To make a bad situation worse, most times the men being watched know the state is watching them. They resent it. And resentment grows fast in people who already feel betrayed. But let's be clear. Not every veteran coming home is ready to pick up that fury. A large share just want the life they left behind. Steady work, quiet evenings, and anything that doesn't smell like trenches or drone engines. Some do slip back into old jobs, grateful to see their kids and determined to stay miles away from politics. Others mouth the official story not because they believe every word, but because it's simpler than reliving the confusion. For them, the state's version is a shield, not a flag. There are towns where returnees blend in with barely a ripple. Neighbors bring food, factories keep spots open, and local officials hand out just enough benefits to keep resentment from boiling. In those places, veterans become the guys fixing roofs or coaching the local kids, carrying trauma they never talk about but choosing routine over rage. A few even find purpose inside the state's own programs, helping the wounded, organizing aid, and accepting the medals because the recognition feels real enough to lean on. Then there are the drifters, men who grumble about corruption in private but never join a protest, who know exactly how the army failed them yet still just want peace at home. They are harder for the Kremlin to read than the angry ones. They are the reason the surface still looks calm. This patchwork is what keeps the regime breathing, for now. Most veterans are not marching in lockstep towards revolt. They are scattered along different paths, some calm, some restless, some still figuring out where they fit. That quiet majority is the buffer buying Moscow time it doesn't really deserve, and the wild card it can't predict. Yet the Kremlin knows one thing for certain. Even the quiet ones carry knowledge no medal can erase. What truly terrifies Putin isn't just numbers or protests, it's knowledge. These veterans understand how armies really work. They know which orders matter and which collapse under pressure. They know how supply lines break. They know where leadership is weak. Many watched their officers fail in moments that still burn into their memory. Some saw corruption tear units apart. Those memories don't just fade because the war moved on. The Wagner mutiny proved how quickly one armed group can shake Moscow. Now imagine not one group, but hundreds of scattered veterans, each one with their own networks and grudges. That's the scenario that Putin dreads. And a revolt doesn't need to look like a dramatic march on Moscow. It could start with small groups refusing orders. It could start with a single commander building a loyal circle around him. Wagner showed how one leader and one structure could shock the Kremlin. The returning veterans come from hundreds of units and thousands of experiences. That makes them harder to track, harder to predict, and far more difficult to control. So if the danger is this obvious, why doesn't the government just end the war and slow the stream of fighters coming home? Well, the answer is simple. Putin can't. His entire system is built on the idea of strength. A sudden peace would force him to explain why so many were sent to fight and what they died for. Hardliners would explode with anger, as even families of soldiers would demand answers. And that doesn't even cover how the men still in the front would feel, completely sold out. Every piece of the system that protects him is tied to the idea that the war must continue until Russia can claim something that looks like victory. Ending the war also risks chaos among the troops still in combat. Analysts warn that sudden demobilization could spark fear, confusion, or even revolt. Soldiers who return home without rewards or purpose often look for someone to blame. Veterans who gave years to the fight would not accept a quiet retreat. They would feel cheated, and cheated soldiers are often the spark that lights wider trouble. International pressure locks him in even further. Ending the war without gains would shatter his image as a strong leader. It would force him to admit he miscalculated. Every speech about resolve and destiny would start to crack, and he knows it. And then there's the simplest problem of all. Russia doesn't have the tools to bring so many fighters back into normal life. The state lacks the money, the housing, and the support services to reintegrate millions of men. Demobilization is hard on any country. In Russia, with weak institutions and a stretched system, it becomes dangerous. With the war dragging on and no end in sight, the Kremlin has tried a different tactic. From a distance, it looks clever. Take the veterans who might challenge the system and turn them into a loyal class that protects it. Putin's hope is simple. If he cannot suppress their anger, maybe he can redirect it, building a new elite out of the men who fought and survived. The plan begins with symbols, because symbols are easy to control. Veterans are handed medals, certificates, and warm praise on television. State media shows ceremonies filled with careful smiles and handshakes, usually featuring men who speak in calm, loyal tones. These staged moments are meant to reassure the public that veterans are respected, and to remind the veterans themselves that loyalty brings rewards. Some enjoy the attention. Others see it for what it is. Cheap theater with soft lights and empty promises. Turns out surviving Bakhmut gets you the same medal they hand out for perfect attendance at a Kremlin photo op. Most know exactly where the line sits between genuine respect and a performance built for the cameras. From there, the strategy moves into politics, where the stakes rise quickly. The government is pushing veterans into parliament at record speed. 28 have already taken seats in the current State Duma, the highest number ever. These men are supposed to connect the front line to the capital, standing in front of cameras to say the war was justified. The losses, they made sense, and the leadership understands what fighters endure. Regional officials copy the approach, placing veterans in local offices to replace bureaucrats who never saw combat. On paper, it looks like a bold refresh. In reality, this is risky. The Kremlin is betting that veterans it elevates will stay obedient once they taste real power. To reinforce the message, the state has built new veteran groups that look grassroots but are funded from above. The biggest, Defenders of the Fatherland, received nearly 12 billion rubles in 2025. They hand out food, gifts, and small grants. They organize parades and help with paperwork. On the surface, they look helpful and patriotic. In practice, they collect information, shape conversations, and keep veterans inside networks that the authorities can monitor. They are political tools dressed up as community support. Money is another lever. Veterans are promised housing, pensions, and jobs. Some get placements in state-run industries. Others find openings in the security services, where combat experience is valued. The idea is simple. If veterans depend on the state for stability, they are less likely to rebel. But the promises often collapse. Housing lists already top 180,000 names. Job offers vanish under corruption. Paperwork disappears in slow offices. The theme is woefully consistent. Expectations rise, but the results lag far behind. And many never get the chance to settle at all. Officers and recruiters show up at their doors with new contracts and fat signing bonuses, sometimes 2 to 3 million rubles for 6 more months. Refuse and the local benefits suddenly slow down, or the police start visiting. By fall 2025, regional authorities quietly admitted that more than 40% of demobilized men had already been pressured or bribed into signing up again. The Kremlin calls it voluntary. The men call it the meat grinder's second bite. Every soldier pushed back to the front is one fewer angry, armed veteran walking the streets at home, at least for now. And the cost of all these things for veterans are crushing regional budgets. In places like Buryatia, Tsiva, and Krasnodar, veteran benefits now consume more than 30% of local spending. Governors are forced to choose between fixing roads, paying teachers, or keeping fighters quiet. Most choose the fighters, leaving hospitals understaffed and schools neglected. Civilians who never signed a contract watch their taxes vanish into the same war that took their sons. Resentment grows on both sides, and local officials, caught in the middle, are starting to panic. This is where the mythology comes in. The Kremlin has started promoting the idea that only those who fought in Ukraine are worthy of leading the nation. It flatters veterans, placing them in a special category that the state can shape. They are told that they are the chosen defenders who proved loyalty under fire. Pride rises, but so does the trap. Once they accept that identity, they are expected to behave as symbols, not individuals. They are supposed to echo loyalty, not ask questions, support the war, not point out its failures. Many see the trap clearly, but they play along, because the alternatives feel dangerous or even hopeless. The problem is that reality doesn't really cooperate. Veterans are not one unified bloc. They come from different regions, classes, and experiences. Some want quiet lives and accept the political projects offered. Others want nothing to do with officials. They see through the ceremonies and the slogans. They speak openly about waste, corruption, and commanders who put them in danger. A smaller number form independent associations to help wounded fighters or families of the dead. These groups do not follow instructions from above, and the state watches them with suspicion. Independent networks are growing fast. Channels like Veterani SVO, Gruz 200, and Podzium Domoy already have hundreds of thousands of followers. They post raw trench footage, name corrupt officers, crowdfund prosthetics the state never delivers, and organize legal help for men facing charges back home. Unlike the state-funded clubs with shiny banners, these networks run on donations and the distrust of Moscow. When one channel calls for a protest or exposes another broken promise, turnout is instant, and the mood is ugly. Security services ban one channel, and 3 more appear the same week. For the first time since the war began, there is a veteran conversation happening completely outside the Kremlin script. Even placing veterans into official roles, like we discussed, has backfired at times. The government wants loyal faces, but many candidates have criminal records or disciplinary issues. Others are unpredictable, drinking too much or speaking too freely. Some clash with police or regional leaders. Every scandal makes the project look thinner and more unstable. Meanwhile, turf wars erupt inside the system. Security services push for heavier monitoring. Governors want veterans they can control. Businessmen want bodyguards and private forces. And then there are the Siloviki shopping for their own private battalions. Rosgvardia, FSB border troops, and even Gazprom Security are quietly recruiting the most disciplined returnees with salaries 3 times the army rate and 0 chance of being sent back to the front. Kadyrov keeps flying plane loads of the toughest fighters straight to Chechnya. Every general or oligarch with ambitions is building his own loyal Praetorian Guard from the same pool Moscow claims to control. The Kremlin pretends not to notice, but everyone understands. The day Putin looks weak, those private units will decide who actually runs the country. Each group fights for its own slice of this returning army, shifting funding and permissions constantly. The battles stay hidden, but the pressure spreads through the entire structure. Every path forward leads somewhere uncomfortable, and the Kremlin knows it. Some routes keep the state in control for a while, others crack the system from the inside. With every new wave of fighters returning home, the odds of unexpected shock grows. When Moscow looks at the rising number of veterans, it sees danger coming from several directions. One possible future is the one it hopes for. Enough veterans stay loyal, take the medals, accept the jobs, and step into a carefully managed political system that lets them feel important without giving them any real power. If it works, the government gains a small but reliable group who talk about duty and unity. On paper, it looks safe. In reality, it depends on veterans staying quiet even when promises collapse. Another path grows out of everyday life. Veterans return to towns where jobs are scarce and crime rises. Small groups form, some turn into gangs that clash with police or officials. This doesn't create a national shock, but it produces a steady wave of trouble across the country. Crackdowns spark more anger, bribes become routine, and officials lose control. Then there's the political path. Charismatic veterans run for local councils or assemblies, and some win, because people trust fighters more than the old political class. Once they gain a foothold, governors feel pressure, and Moscow panics. A veteran with a loyal base can turn from a local figure into a national threat. And finally, the darkest scenario. Some veterans form armed groups or pledge loyalty to rival factions. It echoes the Wagner problem, but this time the pool of fighters is larger and scattered. These men know weapons, logistics, and weak points in state security. Even the hint of such a split sends fear through Moscow. So Moscow keeps tightening the screws while the pressure keeps rising. At some point, something has to give. And when it does, it probably won't give in just one direction. Every month, the front spits out another few thousand men who know exactly how thin the official story has become. They don't need manifestos or leaders to make trouble. They just need to keep talking to each other, to their families, to the neighbors who never left home. That conversation is already happening in kitchens, barracks, courtyards, and telegram channels that Moscow can't shut fast enough. Putin's entire system runs on the idea that strength is eternal, and doubt can be jailed or bought off. These veterans are the living proof that both beliefs are crumbling. They are not an opposition party, not yet. They are something quieter and far more dangerous. Hundreds of thousands of men who have seen the machine from the inside, survived it, and no longer believe the slogans that sent them there. So far, the Kremlin is still buying time with medals, threats, and recycled contracts. But time is the one thing that it is running out of fastest. When the day comes that the next wave walks off the trains and decides the promises are finished, the war that was meant to make Russia unbreakable might end up being the thing that finally breaks the system holding it all together. Now, that day is not today, but for the first time in 25 years, a lot of people in the Kremlin stay awake, wondering when it will be.